Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be starting a new video series that is not so new for me, but I've not been publicly posting it. So at the beginning of the official pandemic, the company I work for, we went from home, and I took it as one of my responsibilities to keep up with policies, numbers, or anything to do with COVID as it relates to the work life. And then more specifically in my region, I keep up with county numbers, which I live in Nashville, so this is Davidson County, or the greater Metro Nashville area, and also the numbers for the state of Tennessee. And I've been sharing these numbers with my coworkers for the past 38 weeks at this point, and so I figured that it was about time that I started breaking off the actual COVID discussion into a more public video series, because I would like to contribute more, I guess is the best way to put it. The stuff that I'm doing is relevant for folks that live in my area, so this is going to be something that's just more, it's more pertinent to Nashvillians than anything else, but I figure if it helps anybody, then we'd be better off for it. And so the first thing I'm going to do is kind of get into, I've gotten into the why, but I want to show you guys how I do what it is that I do. And so I made a spreadsheet on the 13th, which I believe the 13th was the first official day of the pandemic, and then the 15th was the day that we went home as a company. And then from there, I've just been tracking it and like I said, keeping up with it for internal purposes. But here's essentially what I do. I've got the date, and I want to go through the spreadsheet so you guys kind of see what I'm talking about. This video, I want to keep these videos short. This video will be a little bit longer because I'm just explaining the who, what, when, where, and why in a little bit of detail, so you guys can understand like where the data comes from, how I process it, and why it is that I'm looking at this transmission rate specifically as opposed to bed capacity or anything like that. So I've got these four sets are my data sets. I've got date, new cases on the Metro side, and then this column right here. I used to keep up with the weekly totals in this column, but I've changed up the way I do that. I still keep this just for personal reasons, I guess. And then we've got new cases on the state, which is this is a cumulative total, and then new cases from the state on a daily total. So the way the state used to report information was cumulative as well. So what I would do is I would take the new day's total, subtract yesterday's numbers, and then you've got whatever the number is for today, and that's what you can see here. You know what? Hang on. So I've actually got this fancy application here. So this number here is a formula that does just what I said. So it takes this number, subtracts this number, and then gives you that number. And that's how I did it for a while until the state changed the way that they do things. So if you go down to the end of this data set, this is actually the number that I pull straight from the site, and then I do an equation to keep these. I've got this thing about my data looking consistent, and so rather than just get rid of the entire column, I just formatted it to be additive on this side, so you can see this plus this, which is this day plus this number equals this number. So there's no shenanigans. Like I don't know. I keep it like that just for my sake. And then these columns of ones over here are essentially counting the days. And so if I go over here and click highlight, I can see that we've been doing this for 266 days, and I also use it for a daily count over here where it says total cases and whatnot, and this total days. On the display side, and so what I do is I take the information from the city and the state, add the stuff daily like I was saying before, and then I have a spit out, or I have a data on the weekly stats. So this is new cases state, total cases as a percentage, or cases for the week as a percentage of total cases, new cases on the Metro side, and the same thing. And then over here I've got the monthly stats. So the same type of thing, the raw number for each month, what percentage that is of the total, and I do that for the city and the state as well. And then this column right here is percentage of metro cases versus the state, and that's just, that's the lower city number divided by the higher state number expressed as a percentage. And then over here I've just got the maxes for all three categories. So to jump right into it, I'll just cover what's been going on this past week. So the last week in November, the biggest week on both the city and the state side from a transmission rate perspective. Oh, I did forget. So I'm using transmission rate because that's the most consistent way to track new cases, or just overall spread of the of COVID, because it's a consistent number that is easy to deal with, and it's also measurable. So one of the misconceptions about transmission is that if you go get tested as an individual, if you get tested 4 times and you pop 4 times for COVID, then you count 4 times on here, but that's not actually the case. You count once because you are a specific case, and if you get, no matter how many times you get tested, it doesn't accumulate past that one case. So individuals are cases, not tests. And then with bed space and things like that, or hospital space, like those can change, because most of the time the numbers are based off of like current staffing, current bed space, but each hospital has its own method to increase the bed space and whatnot. And so while, like, as a state we're less than 10% on bed space, we have more emergency space that we could add, and it doesn't really do a good job of telling like how many cases there are compared to 2 months ago when there used to be less space, and so on and so forth. So I use transmission rate. I only use transmission rate, and that's why. So I won't go into any more details as far as like the who, what, when, where, and why, apart from saying that I capture my information from the two official websites for the state and the city, and then I back that up with a third website that monitors both of those for accuracy. And so if you guys want that, to see those or to have those links in the future so you can look for yourselves, that's totally fine. I can share those, but for right now, that's the how I do the things. So back into the numbers. Like I said, last week was the biggest week for both the city and the state. For the state, it was barely higher than the previous highest. So the previous highest was at 31,100. They had 31,700. So 600 case difference, except for this isn't completely accurate. This 31,700 is minus today's information. So the state usually posts information a little bit later than the city does. I wanted to get this video done so I could get it out there. And so this is only 6 days of information. So they've been averaging roughly 4,000 cases per day on the state side. So you can imagine this is going to be like 35,700, which is going to be a little bit bigger than where it currently sits, but it's already bigger than last week. And then on the city side of things, we had a pretty drastic increase relative to the previous weeks, and you can see those right here. We had 4,400 cases, and then the previous largest week was 2 weeks ago at 3,100. So 1,300 cases for the city is a big deal. Our max case per day is right over here at 978, and so we haven't hit 1,000 yet. And so to be 1,000 up on last week is pretty significant. Having said that, though, we jump over here to the monthly stats because it's the end of November was Monday, and I wanted to share this. And this is kind of where I was coming, or this is the reason I decided to do this in a more public fashion, is that November blew the doors off of everything. So the state of Tennessee who got rid of their social distancing policies, occupancy policies, and everything a month ago. Like they're getting numbers that are astronomically high compared to where it had been. And so they had 40,000 plus more cases last month than any other month. It accumulates, or it accounts for right at 30% of the total transmission since the beginning of COVID in one 30-day period. And that's important because we'll come back around to that later with regards to policies and reducing transmission. The city also had its biggest month, but only by a little over or a little under 100 cases. That's still significant because it's still 23% of the total cases, which matches the 23% that we got back in June. The difference here being that in July, we made up 18% of the total statewide transmission, and we being Davidson County and the greater Nashville area. And in November, we're right under 10%. That seems to be changing a little bit in December here, but that's a pretty drastic drop. And you can look at this data. So in the middle, when Nashville first started its plan to reopen and everything, mask mandates were not a thing. We got into July when things were going absolutely crazy, relatively speaking. Nashville implemented a mask policy early in the month and then started enforcing it midway through the month. And you can see the drop here in July and August numbers because we went from roughly 18% of the total state transmission rates to about 10%. And then for the subsequent months, it was down even lower than that. And we've seen a little bit of a bump now, but we're still less than 10%. So our growth in relation to the state's growth is not the same. And I think that has a lot to do with our mask policies and our social distancing and occupancy policies, and not much else has much influence on it. There definitely could be other reasons, but I feel like there is enough of a correlation in this particular case and with this set of data to say that like it does work. Masks work. Occupancy and stuff like that, you can't really say, or you can't definitively say, but we can tie the mask policy to a drastic drop in numbers. And then also when the state got rid of their policies, which they never really had a mask policy to begin with, but when they got rid of their policies, their growth has been much quicker than ours, if that makes sense. So then to transition over to the maximums, a few weeks ago when I started tracking maximums, like July was still a thing for the city. Since then, on the daily, weekly, and monthly stats, but obviously November blew the doors off of that. So in November we had the highest single day for both the city and the state. We had the highest week for both the city and the state, and then obviously for both of them we had the highest month. And so things are getting bad. And this is excluding what's coming in the next couple of weeks, because a big part of the conversation going into Thanksgiving this year was, what are you doing? Do you have a bubble that you're creating for you and your immediate family? Do you not care? Are you just going to go and toss it all in the wind and see what happens? There seemed to be a lot of the latter, and so I feel like we're going to see some new records in the next couple of weeks, and that's going to lead to December being the biggest month to date. And then if we don't learn our lesson before Christmas, then we'll probably carry some of that same momentum into January, and we'll progressively get worse until we do get the vaccines. The vaccines are a whole nother conversation that we could potentially talk about in the future. But as of right now, we're fresh on the heels of our biggest week and the biggest month. And so if you're out there and you're on the fence about wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, I would recommend wearing a mask, because we have information that's local that shows that there's a difference in spread in transmission of COVID in an urban area versus rural areas, where the urban area should be more susceptible, but is less susceptible, and but also has the mask policy. And so I would highly recommend that if you don't wear masks, to do so from now on, because it's going to get to the point, like, it's going to get to a point to where you cannot escape it if you go out and about. Like I used to do, up until recently, I would do certain types of social distancing functions, and I just feel like with 1.5% of Tennessee's population getting COVID last month, that like I'm having to peel back off of my stuff. But I'm in a situation that is unique because I have a couple of kids. Our kids are in pods with a couple other families, so we've created a bubble, and we've committed to one another to not do anything that's too extreme outside of the bubble, and I feel a responsibility to pull back off of that. So as far as this type of thing goes in the future, I would like some feedback as far as what people, what you're interested in as a Davidson County resident or Tennessee a resident of Tennessee. I can change the way that the data is visualized, and I can add different types of columns and that help with different aspects of viewing the information, specifically with regards to social distancing or mask efficacy versus just doing whatever you want. But I really would like the feedback, both positive and negative, if you got it. And then I intend to do this every week. This is kind of me just slapping something together, because I'm normally talking about this under the context of this is how it applies to your work life, and this is what to expect for the next few months with regards to your work life. And so just talking about it when the general population is new, and so I don't know if the way that I present it is exactly relevant comparatively. So if you, like I said, if you do have feedback, I'd appreciate it. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.